Part 1. The Birth of Typhon. Have you ever felt the earth tremble beneath your feet and wondered, what ancient rage stirs in the depths below? Long before mortals walked upon her surface, the earth herself knew sorrow so profound that it would birth the most terrible creature ever to challenge the gods. Today, we descend into the primordial darkness where vengeance takes its most monstrous form. Subscribe to journey deeper into the mysteries that shaped our world. The silent rage of the Earth Mother. In the aftermath of the great Titanomachy, when Zeus had claimed his throne atop Mount Olympus, a profound silence fell across creation. But beneath this silence, something stirred. Gaia, the Earth Mother herself, felt every tremor of anguish from her imprisoned children. The Titans, her own flesh and blood, lay bound in the deepest pit of Tartarus, their cries echoing through the roots of mountains and the foundations of the world. She who had given birth to the sky, the mountains, and the seas now felt her heart break with each passing age. The golden chains that held her children grew heavier with time, and Zeus's victory felt like a blade twisted in her ancient heart. For eons, she had watched the new order flourish while her beloved Titans languished in eternal darkness. But Gaia was not merely earth and stone. She was will incarnate, patience given form, and wrath that could outlast the stars themselves. As centuries passed like heartbeats in her immortal consciousness, her grief transformed into something far more dangerous, a mother's vengeance that would shake the very pillars of Olympus. The unholy union. When the pain became unbearable, Gaia made a choice that would alter the fate of gods and mortals alike. She turned her gaze downward, deeper than even her Titan children's prison, to the primordial abyss itself, Tartarus. Not the place, but the being. The personification of the pit, ancient beyond memory, dark beyond comprehension. In the deepest caverns where light had never touched, where even sound died before it could echo, Gaia descended. The earth opened before her like petals of some terrible flower, revealing passages that led to the heart of all darkness. There, in a realm where chaos still remembered its first breath, she found him. Tartarus spoke in voices like grinding continents, his presence a void that made emptiness seem full. Their union was not born of love, but of shared purpose, two primordial forces combining their essence to create something that could challenge Zeus's reign. The very foundations of reality shuddered as order and chaos intertwined, as earth and abyss became one in their terrible intent. The monstrous birth. From this union of grief and darkness came forth something that defied description, yet demanded witness. Typhon emerged not as birth brings forth life, but as volcanoes birth destruction with fire, thunder, and the splitting of the world itself. His form was a nightmare given flesh. 100 dragon heads crowned his shoulders, each one breathing different forms of devastation. Some spat liquid fire that could melt stone. Others exhaled poisonous winds that withered forests in moments. His eyes burned with the light of dying stars, and when he spoke, each head voiced a different language of destruction, the roar of earthquakes, the howl of hurricanes, the hiss of volcanic steam. His legs were not legs but great serpents that coiled and writhed, their scales harder than any armor forged by gods or mortals. When he spread his wings, they blotted out the sun and brought darkness to lands 1,000 miles away. His very presence caused the earth to crack and mountains to bow in terror. But most terrifying of all was his intelligence. This was no mindless beast, but a being of cunning and purpose, inheriting his mother's patience and his father's understanding of ultimate darkness. In his burning eyes lived the accumulated rage of the Earth Mother and the infinite hunger of the abyss. The first tremors of war. Typhon's awakening sent shockwaves through all of creation. His first steps carved new valleys, his voice shattered cliffs, and his breath turned fertile lands into wastelands. Mortals fled before him like leaves before a storm, building shrines and offering prayers to gods who seemed suddenly very distant. The earth itself seemed to celebrate his passage. Volcanoes erupted in greeting, earthquakes announced his arrival, and the very air grew thick with anticipation of the chaos to come. Rivers changed their course to avoid his path, and the sea recoiled from shores where his shadow fell. Even the gods upon Olympus felt tremors of unease. The nectar in their cups turned bitter, their golden halls echoed with whispers of doubt, and their divine light seemed to flicker like candles in an approaching storm. Zeus himself paused in his deliberations, sensing a challenge unlike any he had faced, not the organized rebellion of Titans, but something far more primal and personal. The challenge to Olympus. When Typhon finally raised his 100 heads toward the heights of Olympus, his challenge rang across the heavens like thunder-given voice. Each head spoke a different aspect of his demand. Some roared for Zeus's blood, others hissed promises of torment, and still others whispered of the new age of chaos that would rise from Olympus's ashes. The confrontation was inevitable, written in the very fabric of fate itself. Here stood order against chaos, the new world against the old, Zeus's reign against a mother's vengeance made manifest. The sky darkened as if nature itself held its breath, waiting to see which force would prove stronger, the god who had conquered the Titans, or the monster born from the Earth Mother's breaking heart. As Typhon began his ascent toward the realm of the gods, each step bringing him closer to his divine target, the world below watched in terrified fascination. This was no mere battle approaching, but a reckoning that would determine whether Zeus's order would endure or whether chaos would reclaim the cosmos. Conclusion. And so, as Typhon's shadow falls across the marble halls of Olympus and his 100 voices echo through the divine realm, we are left with the eternal question that haunts all creation. What price does a mother's love demand when her children cry out from the darkness? What power lies sleeping in the earth beneath our feet, waiting for the right moment to rise and reshape the world? The confrontation awaits, but the tremors have already begun. Part 2. The Attack on Olympus. Have you ever wondered what could make a god tremble? What force could drive the immortal rulers of Olympus to abandon their thrones and transform into common beasts? Today, we venture into the moment when divine order itself hung by a thread, when the very foundations of heaven shook with terror. This is the story of the day the gods learned fear. The silence before the storm. In the golden halls of Olympus, an unusual stillness settled like morning mist. The gods moved through their celestial realm unaware that this would be their last day of absolute dominion. Zeus sat upon his throne of clouds and lightning, Hera beside him in regal splendor. Apollo's lyre sang gentle melodies while Artemis sharpened her silver arrows. Hermes counted the day's messages, and Aphrodite gazed into mirrors that reflected her eternal beauty. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Even the eagles that circled the mountain's peak flew in unusual silence. This was the calm that precedes the storm that changes everything, the final moments before divinity would meet its greatest challenge. Birth of the ultimate terror. Deep beneath the earth, in the darkest depths of Tartarus, something stirred. The prison of the Titans, that place where light never ventures, began to tremble. From the very womb of Gaia, the Earth Mother herself, came forth a being so terrible that creation itself recoiled. Typhon emerged, not born, but erupted from the primordial depths. His form defied comprehension, a giant whose head brushed the stars, with 100 dragon heads sprouting from his shoulders. Each head possessed its own voice, some roaring like lions, others hissing like serpents, still others speaking in tongues that could command the very elements. His eyes burned like molten bronze, and wings vast as storm clouds spread from his back. From his fingertips came vipers instead of nails, and his legs were coiled serpents that could crush mountains. This was not merely a monster, this was chaos incarnate, the universe's answer to order itself. The march to Olympus. Typhon's first step cracked the earth for 1,000 miles. His second step boiled the seas. As he moved toward Olympus, the very landscape transformed in his wake. Mountains bowed and crumbled before his presence. Rivers changed their courses to flee his path. The winds themselves howled in terror, carrying his scent, sulfur, and primordial darkness across the known world. Animals fled in every direction. Birds fell from the sky, unable to fly in the chaotic winds that surrounded him. The earth groaned under his weight, and with each of his 100 voices, he declared his intent to overthrow Zeus, to claim the throne of heaven, to return the cosmos to its original chaos. The monster's march was not swift, but it was inevitable. Each step brought him closer to the realm of the gods, and with each step, the very air grew heavier with approaching doom. Divine panic unleashed. The first god to see Typhon approaching was Hermes, messenger of the Olympians, who had been flying on his winged sandals near the earth's surface. The sight struck him like lightning, not Zeus's controlled lightning, but raw, primal electricity that paralyzes before it destroys. Hermes raced back to Olympus faster than he had ever flown, his face pale with terror. He burst into the great hall where the gods were gathered, and his words came in gasps. He comes. The child of Gaia. Typhon rises. The gods rushed to the edge of Olympus to witness this approaching terror. What they saw shattered their divine composure. Here were beings who had overthrown the Titans, who had divided the cosmos among themselves, who had never known defeat, and they trembled. For the first time in their immortal existence, the Olympian gods experienced pure, overwhelming fear. The Great Transformation. The panic that seized the gods was unlike anything in cosmic history. These were the rulers of reality, yet faced with Typhon's approach, their first instinct was not to fight, but to flee. In their terror, they abandoned their divine forms and transformed into animals, the very creatures they ruled over. Apollo, god of light and prophecy, became a hawk and soared toward distant lands. Hermes transformed into an ibis, his messenger's wings now those of a sacred bird. Artemis, huntress of the wild, took the form of a cat, sleek and swift. Aphrodite dove into the sea as a fish, her beauty hidden beneath silvery scales. Dionysus became a goat, Demeter a mare, and even mighty Ares took the form of a boar. One by one, the gods of Olympus abandoned their realm, flying, running, and swimming toward Egypt, where they would hide among the mortals who worshipped similar deities. The transformation was not just physical, it was a shedding of their divine pride, their cosmic authority, their very identity as rulers of the universe. Zeus stands alone. As the last of his family and allies disappeared into the distance, Zeus remained upon his throne. The king of gods sat in his empty palace, surrounded by the silence that had once been filled with divine laughter and celestial music. His thunderbolts crackled in his hands, their light the only illumination in the gathering darkness. Below, Typhon's approach shook the very pillars that held up the sky. The monster's 100 voices had joined in a single, terrible roar that spoke of cosmic revolution. Zeus could flee as the others had. He possessed that power. But something within the thunder god refused to abandon the throne he had fought so hard to claim. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was duty. Or perhaps Zeus understood that if he too fled, there would be nothing left to return to. The age of gods would end, replaced by an age of monsters and chaos. The moment before destiny. Typhon reached the base of Mount Olympus as the last light of day faded from the sky. His 100 dragon heads rose up the mountain's slope like a living nightmare, each mouth breathing different forms of destruction, fire, poison, darkness, and sounds that could drive mortals mad. Zeus stood at the mountain's peak, alone against the approaching chaos. In his right hand, he gripped his most powerful thunderbolt, the one forged by the Cyclopes, the weapon that had defeated the Titans. In his left hand, he held his aegis, the shield that could turn any attack. The two forces faced each other in the growing darkness. Order and chaos, the established divine hierarchy against primordial rebellion. Typhon's 100 voices fell silent for a moment, and in that silence, the fate of the cosmos hung suspended. Zeus raised his thunderbolt, its light illuminating his face, not with fear, but with the terrible resolve of a god who has chosen to fight rather than flee. Typhon's eyes, like burning coals scattered across the night sky, fixed upon the lone figure atop Olympus. Conclusion. And there, in that moment of absolute silence before the clash that would determine the future of all existence, time itself seemed to pause. Two powers beyond mortal comprehension prepared to meet in battle, while somewhere in the distant lands of Egypt, the greatest gods of Olympus huddled in animal forms, waiting to learn whether they would ever again walk as immortals among the stars. What happens when gods discover they are not invincible? What remains when divine order meets primordial chaos? The thunder still echoes through eternity, carrying within it the answer to questions that perhaps should never be asked. Part 3. The defeat of Zeus. The threshold of chaos. In the deepest chambers of ancient memory, there exists a moment that even the gods prefer to forget. A moment when the thunderer himself, Zeus, king of Olympus, wielder of lightning, ruler of sky and storm, fell silent. Not by choice, not in sleep, but in defeat so complete that the very foundations of divine order trembled. What happens when the unthinkable becomes reality? When the one who commands the heavens finds himself stripped of all power, reduced to helplessness in the darkness of a cave? Tonight, we descend into that forbidden chapter of mythology, where even gods discover the bitter taste of vulnerability. The last son of Gaia. From the primordial depths of Earth herself came the final answer to divine tyranny. Gaia, the ancient mother, bore witness to her children's defeat, the Titans cast into Tartarus, the giants crushed beneath mountains. In her womb, she nurtured one last hope, one final champion of the old order. Typhon emerged not as a mere monster, but as chaos incarnate. Where other creatures had form, he was formlessness itself. 100 dragon heads crowned his shoulders, each mouth breathing different forms of destruction, fire, poison, the howling winds of madness. His eyes blazed with the fury of volcanoes. His voice was the roar of hurricanes and the grinding of tectonic plates. He was not born to serve or to worship. He was born to end the reign of Zeus, to restore the primordial chaos that existed before divine order carved the world into neat categories of sky, sea, and earth. Typhon was Earth's final gambit, her most terrible son, created for one purpose: to humble the god who dared call himself king of the universe. As he rose from the depths, mountains cracked, seas boiled, and the very air grew thick with the promise of cosmic upheaval. The other gods, sensing this new presence, fled in terror to Egypt, transforming themselves into animals to hide from the approaching storm. Only Zeus remained, standing alone on Olympus, watching the horizon where Typhon's approach turned day into night. A battle that shook creation. The confrontation began not with words, but with the fundamental forces of creation itself. Zeus, master of the organized cosmos, hurled his thunderbolts, those weapons that had toppled his father Kronos and buried the Titans. Lightning split the sky in patterns of divine geometry, each bolt carrying the weight of cosmic law. But Typhon answered with pure, unrestrained chaos. His 100 mouths roared in languages that predated human speech, sounds that unmade the very air they traveled through. Where Zeus's lightning sought to impose order, Typhon's breath dissolved it back into primordial confusion. The earth itself became their battlefield. Mountains rose and fell like waves as the two titans grappled. The Mediterranean boiled, its waters turning to steam that clouded the heavens. Stars flickered in their courses, uncertain whether to continue their ordained paths or surrender to the approaching void. Zeus fought with all the precision of divine strategy, wielding not just lightning but the adamantine sickle that had once severed his father's power. Each strike was calculated, each movement a demonstration of millennia of warfare experience. But against Typhon, strategy became meaningless. How do you fight an opponent who embodies the very concept of unpredictability? The battle raged across continents, their struggle reshaping the Mediterranean basin. Where Zeus's lightning struck, new islands rose from the sea. Where Typhon's poison touched the earth, deserts bloomed with toxic flowers. The natural world convulsed, caught between order and chaos, neither fully one nor the other. The moment of impossible defeat. Then came the instant that shattered every assumption about divine power. In the midst of their cosmic struggle, as Zeus raised his sickle for what should have been the final blow, Typhon moved with impossible speed. The monster's coils wrapped around the god's body, not to crush, but to restrain. With surgical precision that belied his chaotic nature, Typhon began the ultimate violation of divine sovereignty. Zeus's immortal flesh yielded to the monster's claws as his sinews, those mystical cords that channeled divine power through his body, were carefully severed and extracted. Not destroyed, for that would have been mere murder, but stolen, hidden away like trophies of impossible victory. Zeus, who had hurled mountains at his enemies, found himself unable to lift his own hands. The god who commanded lightning could not even spark a flame. His legs, once capable of striding across continents, became useless appendages. The transformation was not just physical but existential. Zeus ceased to be Zeus, becoming instead a hollow shell of former divinity. Typhon, now triumphant, bore his prize toward the Carishian cave in Cilicia, that ancient hollow in the earth where shadows gathered and echoes never died. Behind him, he dragged the powerless form of the former king of gods, no longer a threat, no longer even truly divine, just another prisoner being led to an eternal cell. The Carishian prison. Deep within the earth, where no sunlight had ever penetrated, Typhon prepared Zeus's eternal prison. The Carishian cave was more than mere stone. It was a wound in the world itself, a place where the normal rules of existence bent and twisted. Here, in chambers that seemed to exist outside of time, the fallen god was bound with chains that held not his body, but his very essence. To guard his prize, Typhon summoned Delphi, the she-dragon whose very presence poisoned hope itself. Her scales were dark as the void between stars. Her eyes reflected not light, but the absence of it. She coiled around Zeus's sinews, those stolen cords of power, keeping them safe in her serpentine embrace. Zeus, reduced to mortality, found himself experiencing sensations no god should ever know. Hunger gnawed at his immortal flesh. Thirst parched his divine throat. Most terrible of all was the silence, where once the music of the spheres had sung constantly in his awareness. Now there was nothing but the drip of water in dark stone passages and the whisper of Delphine scales against rock. In this timeless prison, the former king of gods learned the weight of powerlessness. Every breath was an effort, every heartbeat a reminder of his fallen state. Outside, the world continued without him, but what kind of world could exist without the hand that had shaped it? What happened to justice, to order, to the very concept of divine protection when the protector himself lay chained in darkness? The cave became a monument to the impossible, proof that even gods could fall, that power was not permanent, that the universe itself was far more fragile than any mortal had ever imagined. The silence of Olympus. Above, in the realm of eternal light, Olympus stood empty. The thrones of the gods remained vacant, their palaces echoing with the memory of divine laughter. The sun still rose, but who commanded it? The seas still moved, but who guided their currents? The very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an answer that might never come. In mortal lands, prayers rose to an empty sky. Offerings burned on altars tended by priests who could not understand why their rituals felt hollow, why their words seemed to disappear into silence. The natural world, left without its divine shepherd, began to drift toward entropy. Yet somewhere in the deepest chambers of the earth, in a prison that existed between dream and nightmare, the question remained: can power once lost ever truly be regained? Does divinity survive the theft of its essence, or does it die in the darkness, leaving only the shell of what once was? The sinews of Zeus, coiled in a dragon's embrace, pulsed with stolen lightning. In that rhythmic glow, perhaps there was still hope, or perhaps there was only the endless echo of a god's last thunderbolt, fading into silence that even the immortals could not break. Part 4. The Rescue of Zeus. The threshold, the silence of Olympus. Listen, do you hear that? That absence where thunder should be. There was a moment when the heavens held their breath, when eagles forgot to soar, when even the wind dared not whisper through the sacred groves. For the first time since the world began, Zeus's voice was silent, not resting, not choosing quiet contemplation. Silent because it could not speak. What force could render the thunderer mute? What power could steal the very essence of divinity itself? The fallen thunder, Typhon's victory. In the beginning of this tale, mountains trembled and seas boiled as two titans of power clashed beneath a sky torn between light and shadow. Zeus, master of heaven's fire, faced Typhon, that primordial horror born from Gaia's rage. Picture this monster, 100 serpent heads breathing poison and flame, wings that darkened continents, fingers that could grasp mountain peaks like pebbles. The battle raged across the ancient world. Lightning carved scars into the earth while Typhon's roars shattered temples and sent mortals fleeing to the depths of caves. But raw power, no matter how divine, sometimes meets its match in cunning malice. In a moment that changed the cosmos, Typhon's countless heads struck as one. The monster's coils wrapped around the Lord of Olympus, and with movements swift as serpent strikes, he accomplished what no force had ever achieved. He severed Zeus from his own divine essence. The sinews that bound the god's power to his form were torn away, leaving behind something unthinkable, a powerless Zeus. The prison of flesh, the Carytian cave. Deep in Cilicia, where shadows gather thick as honey, lies the Carytian cave. Here, In this place where light fears to venture, Typhon dragged his prize. Zeus, once the thunderer, once the sky father, once the arbiter of fate, lay helpless as mortal flesh. His divine sinews, the very threads that wove his godhood into being, were hidden away like stolen treasure. Delphine, the serpent woman, coiled around these precious sinews in the cave's darkest chamber. Half dragon, half woman, she was Typhon's faithful guardian, her eyes never closing, her vigil never ending. Every breath Zeus drew in that darkness was borrowed time, every heartbeat a reminder of how far even gods can fall. Outside, Olympus waited. The other gods felt the absence like a wound in reality itself. Thunder no longer rolled to herald divine will. The natural order trembled on the edge of chaos, for without Zeus, who would hold the cosmos together? The unlikely heroes, Hermes and Aegipan's pact. In this hour of cosmic vulnerability, salvation came not from mighty Ares with his spear, nor from wise Athena with her strategies of war. Instead, hope wore the faces of trickery and wildness. Hermes, the quicksilver messenger, and Aegipan, the goat-footed son of Pan. These two gods understood what the others missed, that where strength had failed, cunning might succeed. In the shadows of Olympus, they whispered plans that would have made mortal thieves weep with envy. Hermes, who could slip between worlds like smoke through fingers, and Aegipan, who knew every secret path through wilderness and cave, saw what must be done. "We cannot match Typhon's power," Hermes spoke, his caduceus glinting in starlight. "But we can outwit his watchdog." Aegipan's eyes gleamed with wild intelligence. "Delphine guards sinews, not shadows. And we, my swift friend, are masters of both." Thus began the most audacious theft in divine history, not gold or jewels, but the very essence of godhood itself. The divine heist, infiltration and deception. Picture the Carishan cave in deepest night, its mouth yawning like the entrance to underworld itself. Two figures moved like whispers made flesh, Hermes with his traveler's stealth, Aegipan with his shepherd's knowledge of hidden ways. They descended through passages carved by primordial waters, past chambers where darkness had weight and substance. Deeper and deeper, following the faint emanation of divine power toward its source. And there, in the heart of the mountain, they found her, Delphine, coiled around Zeus's stolen sinews like a living fortress. But Hermes was the god of boundaries crossed and messages delivered, while Aegipan carried the wild's own cunning. Together, they wove deception from moonbeams and misdirection. Some say Hermes played melodies on his pipes that made even serpent dreams turn sweet. Others whisper that Aegipan showed her visions of Pan's sacred groves, filled with dancing nymphs and eternal spring. However they managed it, the impossible occurred. Delphine's eternal vigil wavered. Her coils loosened. Her eyes, which had never known rest, finally closed. In that stolen moment, swift as thought itself, the sinews were reclaimed. The essence of Zeus's power, warm as lightning and bright as dawn, passed from serpent guardian to divine rescuers. The restoration. Thunder returns. Back through shadow passages they raced, carrying divinity itself in their hands. Zeus waited in that terrible cave, mortal and vulnerable, feeling perhaps for the first time what it meant to be truly powerless. Then came the reunion of God and godhood. The sinews merged with divine flesh, and power flooded back like a dam bursting. The change was cosmic, every atom of Zeus's being remembered its thunder, every cell recalled its lightning. The air itself began to sing with returning electricity. The cave filled with light that had no source but divinity itself. Zeus rose, no longer captive, no longer diminished, The Thunderer had returned, and the very stones of Cilicia trembled in recognition of restored power. The seal, the echo of thunder. Thunder rolled across the ancient world once more, but this time it carried a different resonance. It spoke not just of power reclaimed, but of vulnerability discovered. For if Zeus himself could be stripped of divinity, what did that say about the nature of divine power? What other sleeping forces might yet challenge even the gods? In the depths of every storm that followed, in the pause between lightning and thunder, some say you can still hear the echo of that silence, the moment when even heaven held its breath, wondering if its king would ever speak again. The rescue was complete, but the mystery it revealed lingers still in every flash across the sky. Part 5. The final battle between Zeus and Typhon. Do you feel it? That tremor beneath your feet when you stand near a volcano? That distant rumble that seems to come from the very heart of the earth itself? The ancients knew what modern minds have forgotten, that beneath Mount Etna, something stirs. Something that once challenged the throne of heaven itself and lost. Tonight, we journey back to when the cosmos itself hung in balance, when order and chaos met in their final, terrible dance. This is not merely a story of gods and monsters. This is the memory of when creation itself nearly unraveled. The monsters return. In the primordial darkness before time learned to count its hours, Gaia, the Earth Mother, birthed her most terrible child. Typhon, a name that still makes winds whisper in fear. Picture, if you can, a being whose 100 serpent heads could taste the fears of gods, whose voice was simultaneously the roar of lions, the bellow of bulls, and sounds no mortal tongue has words to describe. Zeus had defeated him once before in their first cosmic battle. The king of gods had stripped away Typhon's sinews, leaving him broken beneath the earth. But hatred has a way of healing what should remain wounded forever. From the depths where he had been cast, Typhon stirred. His serpent heads tasted the air of the upper world, and what they tasted was opportunity. The monster that had once made Olympus itself tremble was returning, and this time his fury burned with the accumulated rage of centuries. The chase across worlds. What followed was not merely a battle, it was a cosmic hunt that reshaped the face of creation itself. Zeus, sensing his ancient enemies awakening, descended from Olympus with thunderclouds gathering in his wake. The king of gods would not allow chaos to reclaim what order had built. The chase began in the eastern lands, where Typhon's emergence had split mountains like dry wood. But the monster would not stand and fight, not yet. He fled westward, and with each step, his massive form left scars upon the earth that would become valleys and chasms. Zeus pursued, his chariot pulled by eagles whose wings beat storms into existence. Where his lightning struck, new rivers were born. Where Typhon's feet touched ground, deserts spread like wounds across fertile lands. The terror of mortals was complete. They had become witnesses to a war between forces that predated their very existence. Across continents they raced, through lands that would one day know the names of Sicily and southern Italy. The monster's 100 voices howled defiance while Zeus's thunder answered with divine authority. This was no mere pursuit. This was the fundamental struggle between cosmos and chaos, playing out across the stage of the mortal world. Lightning against fury. Finally, cornered where the Mediterranean embraces the Italian coast, Typhon turned to face his pursuer. The confrontation that followed dwarfed their first battle. This time, both combatants understood what hung in the balance, the very nature of existence itself. Typhon reared to his full, impossible height, his serpent heads weaving patterns of destruction in the air. From each mouth came different forms of devastation, poison that could wither gods, flames that burned colder than ice, winds that could unmake the bonds holding atoms together. Zeus rose to meet him, and for the first time since his victory over the Titans, the king of gods revealed the true extent of his power. Lightning did not merely flash from his hands, it became him. Thunder was not his voice, it was his very essence speaking. The aegis upon his chest blazed with light that forced even the sun to dim in comparison. The battle raged for hours that felt like eons. Each clash between divine lightning and primordial fury rewrote the laws of physics in their immediate vicinity. The very air screamed. Reality bent and twisted as two fundamental forces sought to prove their supremacy. The weight of mountains. But Zeus, for all his power, was more than raw force. He was the principle of order itself, and order always finds a way to contain chaos. As Typhon prepared for what he believed would be his final, victorious assault, Zeus performed an act that even gods would speak of in whispers for millennia to come. The king of heaven reached down into the earth itself and seized Mount Etna, an entire mountain, with all its fire and stone and terrible weight. With strength that redefined the very concept of divine power, Zeus lifted the mountain and hurled it upon his enemy. The impact was beyond description. Typhon, for all his monstrous size and terrible power, was driven deep into the earth beneath the crushing weight of an entire volcano. His 100 heads were pressed into the rock. His serpentine body was pinned beneath stone that had been blessed, or perhaps cursed, by Zeus's own touch. The eternal prisoner. And there, beneath Mount Etna, Typhon remains to this day. The ancient Greeks knew what we have forgotten, that when the mountain breathes fire, it is not geology at work. It is the breath of the monster, still trying to speak his defiance. When the earth shakes in Sicily, it is not tectonic plates shifting. It is Typhon testing the strength of his prison, pushing against the weight that Zeus placed upon him. Every eruption is an escape attempt. Every tremor is a reminder that the war between order and chaos is not truly over, it is merely paused, suspended, held in check by the weight of stone and the will of gods. So the next time you feel the earth move beneath your feet, remember, some prisoners were never meant to be released. Some battles echo across eternity, and some victories require eternal vigilance. The mountain keeps its vigil, the monster keeps his rage. And somewhere between stone and fire, the question remains, what happens when an eternal prison meets an immortal prisoner?